entered into the software that can give you quantitative answers. And by the way, I'm happy to share the software if anyone is interested in this. I can send you the tool. So you can estimate the risk currently and under climate change conditions to see if there's a risk in your community due to this particular exposure pathway. We have then developed a handbook where all that information from the peer review literature and from this risk assessment tool can be entered into a toolbox or a handbook where you can calculate the potential risks, because these adaptation assessments can be very useful to prepare the public health communities for potential impacts from climate change. If you look at Europe, several countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, have not done a climate change adaptation assessment. So they have not considered all the risks from climate change. These are the countries that have not looked at infectious disease risk in their adaptation tools. And our handbook, the one I just showed you, allows you to set up a committee to do the vulnerability assessment, the impact assessment, and the adaptation assessment, and then to collect the most appropriate epidemiologic information that allows you to assess the risk from climate change for that particular infectious disease that you are interested in. Here we asked the infectious disease experts, do you think that your surveillance system works well in your country? And you can see that the majority of infectious disease experts considered their surveillance in need of improvement. Only Spain or so thought that their surveillance system was appropriate. It turns out that there are more cases of salmonella that are reported from Spain into Sweden that are reported in Spain themselves. So basically, they think that their surveillance system is appropriate. The Swedes, of course, don't think so because they're experiencing all these imports. But we asked these experts, do you think your current surveillance system is appropriate? And only very few people thought that it was very effective. Only 5 countries here thought that their surveillance system was appropriate to deal with the climate change threats that are coming down the pipelines. And we took that information and we analyzed all the 49 conditions that are currently, the diseases, all the 49 diseases that are currently mandated by law to be monitored. And we mapped it out according to this matrix here. So we took all the diseases and we asked, how strongly are they linked to climate change? Because imagine this, if a disease is strongly linked with climate change, if we see a very strong link with climate change, do you think that we need to take action in the public health community if there's a strong climate change link? Not necessarily, because just because it's strongly linked with climate change doesn't mean that we need to take action if there is no public health impact. So we weighted that risk with climate change against the impact on society. And we basically created this weighted risk assessment where we mapped it out against the risk, the link with climate change against the potential severity of consequences to society, and mapped it out on this 3x3 table to determine which diseases are at risk for society. And then we evaluated the current surveillance system in Europe, and we decided and we determined that our surveillance system for Lyme disease is inappropriate when it comes to climate change. The surveillance system for dengue is inappropriate, tick-borne encephalitis, Rift Valley fever, chikungunya fever, Vibrio, which is a waterborne disease, and leishmaniasis. And we basically decided that according to our assessment, using this weighted risk assessment strategy, certain diseases, 7 diseases, need to be improved when it comes to surveillance in order to stay ahead of the threats from climate change. How can we go about this? How can we think about this? One option would be if you look at an epidemic curve like this one here. So here on the x-axis you have the number of days. On the y-axis you have the number of cases. And this one here looks like a typical failed public health response because the first case occurs and nobody pays attention, and only once the epidemic has peaked we notice that there was an epidemic, and our response is very late and the control opportunities are very minimal. The alternative would be that we would have an effective public health response where we have early detection of the first case and we have a rapid response, and our control opportunities are so much better because we hit the epidemic before the impact, and our control opportunities are much more effective. The key question here is, how do we go about this? How do we detect the case early? That is the question. And the thing that we have built at ECDC is to build a system that monitors environmental precursors of disease, because it could be that there are environmental conditions that indicate that there will be an outbreak. So we basically conduct environmental monitoring to see if there is a signal early on that could alert us to a potential outbreak that happens later on. So we monitor environmental precursors of disease, and this is the concept. Climate change leads to environmental consequences that have direct exposures and indirect exposures and socioeconomic impacts. And we, public health, traditionally monitor the health outcomes very late in the game with a surveillance system very late at the game when it's too late to interfere. The E3 network aims to monitor these environmental consequences by monitoring environmental precursors of disease. We take advantage of data that's collected at the ECDC through epidemic intelligence and surveillance. We link it with environmental data, we merge the data, integrate them, analyze, interpret them, and try to make sense out of this information. We have used this data set already for the malaria case, the malaria outbreak that's currently going on in Greece, by mapping out all the areas in Greece where there is environmental suitability for malaria transmission, where we can now alert the public health community and tell them, this is the area you need to focus on, by using the data from this E3 network. We have also used it to model the risk from tick-borne encephalitis in the southern part of Sweden. This one here is, we are using spring temperatures to predict the risk of TBE later in the fall, in the southern part in the later part of the year, and we were able to get this thing to work. The model is currently working, so we are using the E3 network to build the system. Another threat of all these diseases is the threat to the blood supply, because if West Nile gets imported into Europe and spreads into the blood supply, everybody who relies on blood transfusion is potentially at risk. And so we took the ranking, the climate change ranking that I just showed you, and matched it against the risk of blood-borne diseases in Europe. And we identified the diseases that are higher at risk for to be transmitted through the blood supply. And you can see that several of these rank very high. And we recommend certain strategies that need to be taken to eliminate these pathogens in our blood supply by using pathogen reduction technologies. Because where are the limits to testing? How many pathogens can we test for? At one point we're going to reach the limit. And there are alternatives to treat the blood supply with these pathogen reduction technologies that eliminate any pathogen in the blood supply and not just a specific one. I've talked about climate change. Climate change is one of the drivers of infectious disease threats. There are many other ones. We have heard about global climate change, but also social inequalities and globalization, social demographic change, public health systems. So a lot of these drivers are a potential issue for public health in Europe, and they can cause all kinds of scenarios. And we have discussed this in detail, what kind of other public health measures need to be taken. The bad news is that climate change is just one of the issues that's up on the horizon. And this is my last slide. Basically, climate change is a risk multiplier of existing vulnerabilities. And we, the public health community, need to take action if there are credible risks, even if there's in the absence of conclusive evidence, and we can enhance our surveillance systems by taking specific actions, the ones I mentioned with the 7 pathogens, and we believe by doing so it will have co-benefits for society at large, because we are able to protect the health of the public if we do the right thing now. And that's my last slide.